Socrates, whom, well inspired, the oracle pronounced wisest of men, Milton, paradise regained. This poor stone-cutter's son, of ill-clothed figure and ugly face, represented the best and highest in Greek genius. He believed that the state, made up as it was of citizens, could be purified and saved only by the improvement of the individual citizen through the education of his mind to recognize virtue and right. He regarded the exercise of mental powers as a sacred and ever-present duty. Moral error was to him intellectual error translated into act. Therefore, to be virtuous, one must first rid himself of ignorance and folly. Self-knowledge was his ideal. Know thyself, his maxim. By waging war against vagueness of thought and laxity of speech, he made himself a singularly apt and ready reasoner. He made no effort to impose his opinions upon another, but by a systematic interrogatory led him to substitute a better opinion for a worse, just as a physician, by appropriate remedies, may enable his patient to substitute a healthy sense of taste for a morbid one. In his method, two processes were distinguishable. The destructive process, by which the worst opinion was eradicated, and the constructive process, by which the better opinion was induced. He contended against not merely ignorance, but ignorance mistaking itself for knowledge or false conceit of wisdom. By getting the assent of his interlocutor to some proposition, he would, by question and answer, lead him to an unexpected but undeniable consequence which plainly revealed inconsistencies. In this way he brought his respondent to pass judgment upon himself, even if, as often happened, the respondent, baffled and disgusted by the destructive process, at this point withdrew from the inquiry, he had, in Socrates' judgment, gained something, for, whereas formerly, being ignorant, he had supposed himself to have knowledge, now, being ignorant, he was in some sort conscious of his ignorance, and accordingly would be for the future more circumspect in action. If, however, having been thus convinced of ignorance, the respondent did not shrink from a new effort, Socrates was ready to aid him by further questions of a suggestive sort, consistent thinking with a view to consistent action being the end of the inquiry. Socrates would direct the respondent's attention to instances analogous to that in hand, and so lead him to frame for himself a generalization from which the passions and prejudices of the moment were, so far as might be, excluded. To him the great ideas of truth, beauty, righteousness, and honesty had reality. By keen questioning and discussion he caused the rejection of error and the discernment of these realities. Is it not a matter for wonder that this educational idea was never followed up except, personally, by a few teaching geniuses? It is a great mistake to confound education and learning. Education is important, but not nearly so important as the ability to apply the learning. It is not what we carry in our heads. It's how we use it. It's the trained mind that counts. Harry Pratt Judson, President Emeritus of the University of Chicago. Chapter I. Some future possibilities of education. When we have tired ourselves out with the discussion of how we are to preserve our civilization, grown almost too complex for the human mind to manage, we find, after all is said, that it is a matter of the intelligence of the individual man. Not of a few gifted persons, but of the general level of intelligence among the people. For our present purpose, a sharp distinction must be made between intelligence or good sense and knowledge or learning. We are all acquainted with the person who knows so much that he don't know anything. Learning and information may actually smother the intelligence. If knowledge came to the same thing as intelligence, or even if it were always certain to have a favorable effect upon intelligence, we might then feel assured that education, as we practice it, is the proper means to that end. While our educated classes generally appreciate the various advantages of their college educations, there is to be found among them a widespread skepticism as to its value in producing efficient intelligence. On the other hand, there is enough evidence all about to keep us from falling into the error of assuming that intelligence is an innate quality born in persons and that man cannot, by taking thought, add 1 cubit to its stature. Professor James Harvey Robinson, in his Mind in the Making, writes, the results, however, of our present scheme of liberal education are disappointing. One who, like myself, firmly agrees with its objects and is personally so addicted to old books, so pleased with such knowledge as he has of the ancient and modern languages, so envious of those who can think mathematically, and so interested in natural science, such a person must resent the fact that those who have had a liberal education rarely care for old books, rarely read for pleasure any foreign language, think mathematically, love philosophy or history, or care for the beasts, birds, plants, and rocks with any intelligent insight, or even real curiosity. This arouses the suspicion that our so-called liberal education miscarries and does not attain its ostensible aims. What is it to be intelligent? Is it not to have the faculty of seeing things as they actually are, in their proper relationships to all other things, to be able to distill from experience the natural laws governing events, to discipline the emotions so that they may cooperate with rather than defeat intelligent judgment? Our intelligence is an instrument, the only means we have of adjusting ourselves to our environment, both material and social. It is our only resource in gaining mastery and control over the quality of our lives and emancipating ourselves from the tyranny of circumstance. Intelligence operates by directing thought and action, the effects of which make up the abundance or poverty of our lives. Thought and action are determined by judgment or choices and resourcefulness in devising ways and means. Constructive imagination. How is intelligence developed? That is to say, how shall we acquire surer judgment and wider and more vivid imagination, taking it for granted that if we know what we want and how to get it, we will have will enough to act? How far do our present educational processes and methods achieve these results? Again, let us distinguish carefully between education, which is the development of intelligence, and education, which is mere training and has little or nothing to do with intelligence. Indeed, training, if carried too far, as the Germans had a tendency to do, may stifle intelligence. Training and taming are similar processes. Mr. Edward A. Filene, the Boston shopkeeper, as he delights to call himself, whose business success and international activities give a special weight to his conclusions, says in a recent article in Collier's Weekly, "The fact that I have lacked a bookish background has enabled me to arrive at sound conclusions in business with a minimum handicap of preconceived notions. I have missed much by not having read more. But it is a fact that one who can stock his mind so full of the record of policies which have failed that it gives him a feeling that the field of possible achievement is pretty limited. I hesitate to make this statement lest it be misunderstood. I certainly do not mean to counsel young businessmen to a deliberate avoidance of education. I mean only to suggest that conventional education and wide reading too often tend to take the element of daring out of a man's mind. It is possible to be so sophisticated that the naive courage to experiment will be lost. This does not mean that education is to be disregarded. It means only that it must be improved to the end that it will make men more interested in doing new things than in simply knowing about old things. If we examine our own intellectual processes, do we not find something like this? The mind consists of ideas and their relations to each other. Thinking is the process of manipulating these ideas into relationships which produce concepts, decisions, and beliefs. These, in turn, if they can displace the old habitual concepts and beliefs, determine our attitudes and actions. Intelligence is the possession of ideas which are exact counterparts to the facts of the external reality of our environment. Ideas related together in the mind exactly as the external facts are related in reality. It then follows that a proper combination of ideas in the mind will produce concepts and working beliefs likely to lead to successful action and harmonious adjustment to environment. Intelligence is the ability to manipulate ideas efficiently so that conditions pictured in the mind as desirable can be brought to realization. The mind is constantly weaving ideas together. The result may be a chaos of threads without form or meaning, or it may be a beautiful pattern of a significance and value wholly apart from the ideas which compose it and consisting entirely in the relationship of the ideas. This pattern may or may not correspond to anything. It may be a fantastic picture, or it may be a faithful photograph of reality, or possible reality, like an architect's elevation of a handsome building. In the latter case, the pattern may have great utility as well as beauty. Every work of man was first an image in some man's brain, assuming that intelligence can be developed. What methods and instructions do we maintain for the purpose, and how efficient are they? Beyond the college and university, we give very little attention to systematic education, either taking it for granted that the Bachelor of Arts has a fully developed intelligence, that further effort in that direction is scarcely worthwhile, or that the newspaper, church, lectures, and the experience of life serve the purpose adequately. Or perhaps it may be that our confidence in the efficacy of the collegiate process of creating constructive intelligence is not complete. Of course, it is not practicable for a person to prolong his residence at college beyond the normal period. But there is certainly no insuperable difficulty, if we should care enough about it, in adapting the educative process to the convenience of alumni, the major part of whose attention must be given to earning a livelihood. It is certainly a fair inference that the effect of the collegiate process, successful as it may or may not be in training men or in conferring social advantages upon them, is not to inspire the graduate with any excessive desire for more of it. Would this be true if the college actually did and could continue to develop intelligence in its members? Perhaps we are thinking of impossibilities. It does not seem credible that any considerable improvement could be suggested in our educational processes, administered as they are by specialists who are not only themselves wise but who pretend to ability to make others wise. Yet we know the deadening power of habit, the force of tradition, the cramping effect of institutions, and the inertia of vested interests. May we venture so far as to suggest that the really intelligent man resembles less the gourmand than the athlete, that he is shy about stuffing himself with other men's opinions or ideas until he finds that he can assimilate them completely. He has more confidence in mental exercise than in mental massage. He prefers the company of those who stimulate him to think for himself rather than association with great authorities who tell him what he ought to think. In this connection, one cannot help recollecting old Socrates, who, pretending to know nothing but seeking truth by questioning everybody, really had the true method of teaching. By his questioning, he made an opportunity, an occasion for his companion to examine his own ideas and their relationships, and by cross-questioning enabled his companion to perceive and correct the error and insufficiency of these ideas and opinions. Suppose we take, for example, the idea of property. No person can be considered intelligent who has not a comprehension and some understanding of this concept. A learned professor may lecture for an hour on this idea, and at the end may assign to his students 100 pages of reading in a book which he has written on the subject. He may laboriously explain over and over that property is not a thing but a social relationship involving the right of use of economic goods. The student or reader may go so far as to commit to memory the essential parts of the 100 pages of reading. Yet the chances are that, for all practical purposes, the student will hold to his original idea of property, a cartoon in a newspaper, if it happens to confirm some naive idea, may be more effective in 2 minutes than the professor's labor of many hours. It would be interesting to know, by the way, the relative influence which professors of economics and cartoonists have on the minds of the public. Real education, in the sense of developing intelligence, must go much deeper than imparting information about facts or doctrine. It must deal with the fundamental attitude of mind and beliefs of the student before improved ideas can be planted in the mind. The ground must be prepared, cleared of old rubbish, and adapted to the nourishment of the new plant. This means work for the student, active participation under stimulus rather than a receptive or passive condition. Expert questioning is the method by which the beliefs and attitudes of mind are disclosed. Self-questioning is difficult. Guidance is almost essential. Critical questioning appraises the value of the ideas disclosed and helps to clear out the rubbish. Suggestive questioning plants the new ideas while confirmatory questioning nourishes them. The average adult probably has already more information than he can utilize. His mind resembles an untidy desk. He cannot lay his hand upon an item when he has need for it. His ideas are unorganized. They are not properly related and hence do not cooperate together to form clear-cut concepts and definite plans of action, like an unorganized mob. There can be no unity, harmony of action, or intelligent purpose among them. All about us are evidences that men crave more intelligence. Correspondence schools prosper exceedingly in spite of the little they can give for a large fee. Large business enterprises and associations want educational work among their members and employees. The colleges are overcrowded and labor organizations are experimenting with workers' classes and colleges. The alumni of Amherst College have obtained a promise from that institution to share with them some of the produce of the college. What demand could be more legitimate or more worthy of satisfaction? We have great faith in the principle that when people become aware of a need and create a desire for its satisfaction, some means will be invented presently in response to this demand. This groping for light, manifest in so many ways, is bound to lead us into experiments in adult education, adapted to the convenience of people busy in their vocations, less expensive and more efficient in developing intelligence than the present methods and agencies. Out of this experimentation, a new type of institution may be evolved which will fulfill these requirements. It will provide guidance and stimulation in such time, place, and manner as will require the minimum of sacrifice and expense on the part of the patron, maximum service to all who need it and desire it, regardless of medieval dignity and tradition, will be its purpose. It will not hesitate to make use of moving pictures, the correspondence school idea, periodicals, discussion groups, or any other devices calculated to further its purpose. If mental vigor or intelligence can be improved and developed by exercise or processes analogous to physical culture or athletics, a technique will be invented and perfected, and appropriate institutions will be established in which it can be made practical. It may become quite a matter of course for the businessman, for example, to devote 30 minutes or an hour daily, either privately or in company, to mental setting up and stimulation under some system of direction yet to be worked out. Might not the daily dozen ideas apply to mental as well as to physical health? Everybody has at times experienced an exhilarating effect from hearing or reading some notable utterance which has toned up his mind for many hours thereafter. Perhaps it has been a conversation or discussion which has stimulated his mental functions so that he feels that he is hitting on all cylinders. Such experiences leave permanent effects in a more vigorous intelligence, increased analytical power, and independence of thought. If this thing which is now more or less accidental could be systematized and organized, it might prove to be the thing we are searching for in adult education, the technique of future education, especially in subjects which are largely relationships of ideas rather than matters of fact. Economics, for example, will probably depend less and less upon reading and listening and more upon arousing mental activity and constructive imagination. With a new technique will come a new concept of teacher. Not an authority heavy with dogma and conclusive opinions, but a sort of guide, familiar with the field and able to direct the inquirer to what he needs, and arouse his enthusiasm in the pursuit of it. I announce to men the intellect. I announce the good of being interpenetrated by the mind that made nature. This benefit, namely, that it can understand nature, which it made and maketh. Nature is good, but intellect is better. As the law giver is before the law receiver, I give you joy, O sons of men, that truth is altogether wholesome, that we have hope to search out what might be the very self of everything. Emerson, Socrates, his method, known as the Socratic, became famous throughout the Mediterranean countries. It was an art of cross-examination which lured even the wisest into contradictions. He veiled his own knowledge behind a professed ignorance, and by a series of carefully directed questions brought out from his hearers the truth he sought. World Book.